My name is Paula. I'm a pediatric dietitian and I'm here with your baby club to answer all your weaning and nutrition, baby nutrition, toddler nutrition questions. So send those in to me. I'll be checking out all your questions and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions about weaning, starting solids, moving on as your baby gets older, any nutrition or food related questions about starting solids with your little baby. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. So my name is Paula. I've been a dietitian for 20 years now, almost all of that working in with children and their families, working in pediatrics. So I've worked in lots of different children's hospitals, covered many different areas of children's nutrition, different wards, outpatients, things like that. And the last 5 years or so, I've also had my own business, which is called Tiny Tots Nutrition. So I see a lot of children, lots of families on a one-to-one basis, helping them with their children's nutrition. Particular focus on weaning and food allergies. And I also, alongside that, work in an food allergy research unit. So I'm really interested in food allergies, as you can tell. So yeah, let's get started. I can see we are starting to have some questions coming up. So yeah, send in your questions and be really happy to start answering those. I'm just checking down here if we have any questions that have come in. So let us know any of your questions and we'll get going. Okay, so we have a question here from a Facebook fan, so from the group, asking about twins were 6 weeks premature. Should I start weaning according to their due date or their actual date? Yeah, it's a really good question. For babies that are born prematurely, so for example, these twins were born 6 weeks premature. So full-term baby is considered anything from 37 weeks gestation. So 36 weeks and before is considered premature. So these babies were born 6 weeks premature. So I would say you don't necessarily have to, or you wouldn't necessarily wean them 6 weeks earlier. So I would say looking for their signs of developmental readiness is your best kind of clue and guide as to whether your babies are ready to start on solids. So this goes for any baby. With premature babies, I would also discuss this with, you usually are under a neonatal team for a while after, until the babies are at least 2 years of age. So we'll discuss it with them as well. If there are any particular developmental concerns that you have or any feeding issues with them, I would keep in touch with your team. But as a general guide, the signs of developmental readiness to look for in your baby to know whether they ready to start weaning include being able to sit up. They don't have to be able to sit up completely unaided, but they should be able to sit up within some form of chair, some form of high chair that you can feed them in. So you can still give them a little bit of support on the sides, but they shouldn't be sort of falling over or hunched over too much. They should be able to sit up and have some core stability control there. Also be able to hold their head and neck up steady, so they must have that head control, which is obviously important for swallowing foods. A third sign to look for is that your baby can look at food, pick it up and bring it to their mouth. That is just going to really help them when they're learning how to eat, their feeding skills. And a fourth sign is the loss of the tongue thrust reflex. So babies are born with the tongue thrust reflex, which is very strong initially, and that's just when the tongue goes forwards and backwards. And that's the reason they have that is to help them with breastfeeding or formula feeding, bottle feeding. But as they get a bit older and we start introducing solids, then if we don't want the food just to come straight back out, we want them to be able to move the food to the back of their mouth and swallow it. So that's another sign to look out for, that they're not just moving their tongue backwards and forwards. Okay, so I hope that helps. Okay, so there's another question that's come through from the Facebook group, and it's asking about what are the signs that my baby may have an intolerance to certain foods. Since weaning, she has developed eczema, and I'm worried that something she's eaten may have triggered it. Okay, sure, really good question. So there's a big difference between intolerance and allergies. Okay, so these words are often used interchangeably by people, but they're actually two very different things. We shouldn't, if you're talking about allergies, you shouldn't use the term intolerance. So there are lots of different signs. So first of all, I'll tell you the difference between allergies and intolerances. So allergies involve the immune system. So you can get different types of allergies. You can get immediate onset type allergies, which, like the name says, the symptoms come on quite quickly, quite soon after they've eaten a particular or drank a particular type of food. And then delayed allergies, the symptoms come on much later, more than 2 to 3 hours later, and it can be up to 2 or more days later. So delayed allergies, you can see, are very difficult to try and unpick exactly what it is that's causing a problem, because if your child has eaten something and then only has reaction 2 days later, it's very difficult to try and tell what exactly it is that caused that particular reaction. So the types of symptoms that you get from allergies include, so if they're immediate onset, you can get a red rash, hives, which are like raised sort of welts on the skin. You can get swelling of the lips, eyes, tongue, around the face, and you can get vomiting. And sometimes, if it's very severe, you can get throat swelling and breathing problems, and the most severe form, collapse, anaphylactic reaction, which is very extremely rare in babies. Then the type of reactions that you get for delayed reactions are more to do with the gastrointestinal tract and the skin. So you can get a worsening or flaring of eczema. So that's with this question. I'll come back to that. You can get various type of rashes, but they delay, they come on later on. You can get diarrhea, vomiting, tummy pain, abdominal pain, colicky type pain, those sorts of symptoms. If you look on Allergy UK, they've got fantastic resources on allergies and what to look for in terms of what the symptoms are if you think your baby might have an allergy. An intolerance is actually a digestive issue, so it's nothing to do with the immune system. An example is lactose intolerance, and lactose is a sugar in milk. With allergies, we're talking about children's immune system reacting to certain proteins in food, whereas an intolerance is to do with the digestion or breaking down of that particular food. And that can cause, so for example, lactose intolerance, and that can cause symptoms such as wind, bloating, diarrhea, those types of symptoms further on down the gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so back to this question. Since weaning, your baby has developed eczema, and I'm worried that something she's eaten may have triggered it. So the first thing I would say is that food allergies don't cause eczema. We know that certain food proteins may exacerbate or make eczema worse in some children. And the younger the child's eczema started and the more severe the eczema started, the more likely it is that food allergies can be related to that eczema. So the first thing I would say is take your baby to your GP, discuss with your doctor. They'll be able to tell you if it actually is eczema that your baby has, and to give you an advice on in terms of the skin treatment of your baby. So various moisturizers and creams and things. That's not my area, but speak to your doctor about that. And then I'm not sure how old this baby is, but you might They might refer you to an allergy specialist depending on what they think and after speaking to you, because as I said, the younger the baby is that the eczema started, particularly under 3 months of age, and the more severe the eczema is. So if steroid creams are needed on a daily basis, if the eczema is not under control despite various treatments, then the stronger the chance is that it could be related to food allergies. So I hope that helps. Okay. Right, next question. First time mum, my baby's almost 5 months old and I want to start solid food after he will be 6 months. Which food can I start first so he will not have an issue with constipation? Okay, so first of all, as to whether you start at 5 months or 6 months, remember those signs of developmental readiness I was talking about. So some babies might be ready at 5.5 months. Some may only be ready at 6 months. So look out for those signs of developmental readiness as opposed to the actual age of your baby. So there really can be quite a bit of variation between different children in terms of when they are actually ready. So which food can you start with? So constipation can be a problem when children first start on solids. You will notice their bowels, their poos will change when you start introducing solids. So the color might change slightly, the consistency might change, might get more firm, the stools. That's completely normal. They shouldn't necessarily develop constipation, but what I'm saying is you will see some changes in their nappies, in their bowels. So the best foods to start with that I usually recommend are things like green vegetables and white vegetables. So the bitter, neutral tasting vegetables are really good ones to start with, because we know that babies have a preference for sweet tasting foods, and that's because breast milk is sweet, and so we want them to like and to feed on breast milk, and so they have a preference for sweet things. That's not to say they won't like the savory, bitter tasting things, but they need a chance for the taste buds to develop, start liking those, and it takes a little while to start liking those. So that's why we usually recommend starting with vegetables, things like broccoli, green beans, asparagus, cauliflower, avocado, potatoes, all those types of things. There's nothing wrong with the sweet tasting vegetables or fruit. It's just that we want to first of all train the baby's taste buds just to get used to those more savory, bitter tasting vegetables initially, before you start expanding and including all different color types of vegetables. So like sweet potato, carrots, parsnips, all those types of root vegetables, and fruits as well. Absolutely fine to expand to that. The first 2 weeks or so, I usually advise just including the green and white veggies at first. And vegetables and fruits will all be absolutely fine for constipation. If you do find that your child is particularly prone to constipation or seems to have an issue with that, speak to a health visitor or your GP. And often things like fruits, that's things like pears, prunes, like stewed prunes, apricots, peaches, plums, those types of fruits can really help with constipation because they draw water into the bowel. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. Going on to the next one. Weaning has been going really well for us. That's great. But since I've started giving my daughter more lumpy food, she refuses to eat it. How can I encourage her to move away from purees? Okay, this is a great question. Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and it's very common for babies to get a little bit stuck on the initial smooth purees, and that's because those are very easy to eat and they really don't require much chewing, and they can just basically swallow the smooth food. But the way you can encourage your baby, I'm not sure how old this baby is, but presumably they're over 6 months. So the way you can encourage them with more lumpy foods is to offer, first of all, to offer soft finger foods. So giving your baby a little bit of control and allowing them to self-feed quite a lot can really help with them learning how to deal with different textures in their mouth. And And also with the purees, what you can do first of all is you can start thickening up the purees. So you can keep them quite smooth initially, but thicken them up initially. And then instead of pureeing them with a sort of hand blender and pureeing them quite a lot, you can start mashing them down so there's still a couple of lumps in that. And that the more exposure they have to these things, the more they get used to dealing with those different textures in their mouth. If we only give them smooth purees and we don't give them exposure to anything else, they will never get used to dealing with those lumps and different textures in their mouth. If you find that your baby's refusing it, or maybe they're gagging on these lumps, what I said about finger foods, that can really help. So the baby actually putting foods in their mouth themselves and giving them more control can really help them with getting used to different textures. For finger foods, if you make sure that they're quite big initially, because babies only have the palmar grasp, so they pick up things and hold them with their fist. So if the finger foods are quite big, sort of chip shaped, about the size of an adult finger or two, that's the right kind of size. And if they are very soft, so if you can squish the food between your two fingers, that can really help show you whether it's soft enough for the baby's mouth, because they'll be able to mash them on their gums and with their tongue at the top of their mouth. So I'd really advise you to include some soft finger foods, and also allow baby to feed themselves even the puree. So if you thicken up the puree slightly, allow them to get their hands in there, get messy, using their fingers to put the food in their mouth is really messy, but it's really good to help babies learn how to cope with that different texture. There's another spoon, there's a particular type of spoon called a dip spoon. It's by this brand called Cogni Kids, and this can really encourage self-feeding as well. So you can see it's got like little silicone bumps in it over here. So if you dip that into a thick puree, if baby dips that into a thick puree, some of the food will stick around it, and they can get the food from their bowl up to their mouth. Using their fingers can help as well. So I'd really encourage you to try and help your little one to self-feed, and that can make them more accepting of lumps and different textures later on. It's really important to introduce lumpier textured foods before around 9 to 10 months, because research has shown that if you leave baby only on smooth purees, very smooth purees, for very long, like beyond 9-10 months, then it becomes harder and harder the older they are to introduce those lumpier textures. Okay, so another question here about age of weaning. So current advice is to wean from 6 months, but my 4-month-old, 17 weeks, is always hungry, watching us eat, and has started waking in the night again. What would you advise? Okay, so so just to say, the current advice is to wean from around 6 months. So that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be 6 months on the dot. Remember those signs of developmental readiness. If they are showing those signs at 5 months, then they should be ready to start weaning at 5 months of age. So it's around 6 months of age. You don't have to wait necessarily until they are exactly 6 months of age. Because if you think about, babies could be born anything between 37 and 42 weeks gestation. So that's already a 5-week difference. So some babies develop at different rates, and so I'd really encourage you to look for their signs of developmental readiness. Having said that, at 4 months of age, a lot of babies can go through a growth spurt, which sounds like your baby is doing. So they might need some extra milk feeds for a while. They might need some feeds at night. It just means they're going through a growth spurt. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are ready for food because they are hungrier and waking up. It's a great sign that they're watching you eat and that they seem interested. That's excellent. And what I would advise, even before you start offering foods, is to give baby different teething toys. So similar things to this dip spoon, silicone toys and teethers, chew teether, things like that they can put in their mouth and chew on, and you can bring them to the table and they can sit with you, and they can practice picking things up and putting them in their mouth and chewing on them, and that will give them the practice of chewing things and using their gums and things before they even start food. So what I would say with this baby who seems to be hungrier is give them more milk feeds, and look out for those signs of developmental readiness. So they might be ready in the next couple of weeks, and maybe by the time they're 5 months, they might be ready if they're showing all those signs of developmental readiness. Okay, so I'm just going down here. Okay, so when should my daughter start to use a cup rather than a bottle? I've tried giving her both with the anti-spill type and the free-flowing type. One seems like she can't get any out and the other drenches her. Okay, great question. So what we usually advise when you start weaning, when you start introducing solids, to start alongside that to give a little cup which has water. They don't need large amounts of water, so I'm just talking tiny little sips at this stage. We don't want them to be, they don't need to be drinking any large volumes of water, but it's just to get them used to the skill of sipping a liquid rather than sucking or feeding from either the breast or a teat. So there's a different actions, different set of muscles that they use around the mouth. So I would advise, if you are going to be offering water to offer it from an open cup. So something like this is just an example. This is the Cognikix cup. So just putting a little bit of water, about an ounce, 30 mils or 30 mils or so. Baby will probably spill it all over the place, but it's getting them used to using their mouth and their lips to sip as opposed to sucking from a bottle. There are also some other brands, Baby Cup, Hello, and there's another one called Easy Peasy, little silicone cup. There's a Tommy Tippy cup that's not got the valve. So I would look for one that doesn't have a valve, because yes, it's going to be messy and it's going to spill, but you don't want one that has a valve, because the valve means that they'll still be sucking, and you want them to be sipping as opposed to sucking from that. So I would say for water, use a non-spill one. I'm just trying to think of some other examples of the Doidy cup is another one. It's like a slanted cup, and it's got a little handles on the side, and that can help baby to start sipping some water. If you're talking about, sorry, I just had a thought. If you're talking about moving on from using a bottle in terms of giving them their formula or express breast milk, when they are about 12 months, that's when the speech and language therapists usually advise to start moving them away from bottles and moving on to a cup. But for water, you can start introducing that, the little open cup, from 6 months of age. Okay, so another question, next question, how many meals should I be giving my 6-month-old? I'm just about to start weaning, but I'm unsure about how it fits in around these bottle feeds. Okay, great question. So when you first start weaning, say around 6 months, when you start seeing those signs of developmental readiness. So when you first start, you'll just be offering your solids to your baby once a day, and their breast feeds or their formula feeds will not decrease very much. So what you're aiming to do is to keep the milk feeds round about the same, and just introducing once a day some food. And then after about 1 to 2 weeks, just depending on your baby, some of them move along really quickly and some take a little bit longer. Around 2 weeks or so, introduce a second meal, second time that you're offering foods. And then after around a month or so, at about 7.5 months, you would be offering food 3 times a day. But remember, initially when you're first starting off weaning, it's just little tastes that your baby's having. You're not concentrating on or focusing on the volume of food that they're eating. It's just the tastes, the textures, just exposing them to those different tastes. And it's really not about the amount and the volume that they're eating. You're not aiming to kind of fill them up with those vegetables. You're just getting the tastes and getting them used to something that isn't a liquid and that tastes different. So it's a different texture and a different taste. So it's all very new for your baby. So start slowly, and it's a very, very gradual process. And the breastfeeds or formula feeds are still a very important part of their nutrition throughout their first year of life and beyond. So don't be in too much of a rush to decrease those. As they get older, you will naturally decrease the amount of milk that they're having, but it's a very gradual process. So at first, start with once a day, offering some solids, and aim to keep your milk feeds around about the same. Okay, I've just got time for another few questions. So, okay. Okay, so there's a question here about a 7-month-old would rather have solid foods than baby milk. Is that okay at this age? So 7-month-old, the milk feeds, so whether that's breastfeeds or formula feeds, are still really, really important for your baby. So you still want your baby to be having, if you're breastfeeding, you wouldn't know the volume, but you'd still be feeding them at least 4 times a day, maybe more, feeding them on demand really, and offering solids 3 times a day in between that. For formula milk, they would still be having around 600 mils of formula at this age. So the solid foods start becoming more important as they get older, but at 7 months, you definitely don't want them to be having you don't want them to be having solids instead of milk. It's both alongside, so it's complementary feeding. That's what we call introducing solids or weaning. So the foods complement the milk feed. So you still want them to be having their milk feeds, and if they're formula fed, around 600 mils a day at that age. A question from a Facebook fan: what is baby-led weaning, and should it be used in place of regular weaning or alongside? Is there an ideal age to start? Okay. So baby-led weaning is a term that was first introduced by the health visitor called Jill Rapley in the UK, and it is a term which shows that babies are allowed to feed themselves right from the beginning of weaning. So that doesn't mean so it's mainly finger foods that they would be having, because obviously that they can pick that up and put that in their mouth. That is baby-led weaning, but you can give them other textures as well. You can give them a preloaded spoon with some Greek yogurt, for instance, or that type of texture, so they can still have pureed textures. It's just another texture, but you would load it onto a spoon and offer it to them that way. So regular weaning or traditional weaning is what we describe as starting off with a smooth puree and then gradually thickening up that puree and making it lumpier and more textured. But even with the sort of the traditional weaning, the NHS still recommends giving soft finger foods alongside purees. So it's not kind of a only purees or only finger foods. Baby-led weaning is when the baby is allowed to feed themselves, and you would not be putting a spoon in their mouth. You might be preloading a spoon and giving it to them, or just giving them foods on the tray to pick up themselves. And typically the age when you start, well, it's the same as with what I was saying earlier, looking for those signs of developmental readiness, and that is usually around 6 months of age. Okay, so I hope that answers your questions, and thank you to everyone for joining me and your baby club on this Wednesday afternoon. I'm now going to be heading over to Instagram, so if you didn't pick up any of your questions here, you can find me on Instagram on the Your Baby Club page, and I'm going to be answering some more questions there. So, or otherwise, I'll see you next Wednesday for another live on the Your Baby Club Facebook at 2 o'clock on Wednesday. So hope to see you then. Bye now.